This week, after a last-minute cancellation, it's just the leadership and communication segment. New year, new cyber threats, how boards are stepping up or not, why CISOs should build stronger bonds with the legal function in 2025, new managers, you don't need to know it all, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly.
Do your end users always, and I mean always without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So my next question is, how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question: Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. Check it out at securityweekly.com/1Password. That's the number 1 password. ThreatLocker implements a least privileged approach to cybersecurity, blocking every executable unless specifically authorized by your team. This methodology mitigates ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits, and ensures 24/7, 365 protection for your organization. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent known and unknown threats in your digital environment, safeguard your data and operations from threat actors, and align your organization with respected compliance frameworks, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker. IT professionals, mark your calendars. Zero Trust World 2025 is happening in Orlando, Florida, February 19th to 21st. This event is tailored for IT leaders and cybersecurity experts who want actionable insights on zero trust strategies, practical solutions for modern threats, and meaningful connections with industry peers. Plus, take advantage of on-hand Cyber Hero boot camps, expert-led sessions, and the chance to earn CPE credits and your Cyber Hero certificate. Save $200 on your in-person registration using discount code ZTWSW25 at securityweekly.com/ZTW2025. Reserve your spot now. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 378, recorded January 13th, 2025. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me today for this single segment now is my co-host, Mr. Ben Carr. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, Matt. How's it doing? Monday, just you and me having a conversation. It's going to be fun. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, we don't even have to worry about, an interview segment or figuring out what people want to talk about. We're just going to talk about what we want to talk about.
Jason doesn't have to reorganize stuff. Like, it's just as they come. Yeah, this will be good.
Well, he did get he got a new head football coach.
You did?
I think Mike Vrabel's going over to lead the Patriots. I heard McCarthy may have gotten fired today after they refused for him to interview at Chicago, which is kind of weird. My Buckeyes won this weekend. I have my Buckeyes shirt on, everybody, because they're going to the national championship game next week. So here's the beauty,
Congrats.
Ben. I'm trying to get tickets. We're pre-recording the 20th segment anyways, so it's perfect. If I get tickets, taking the son and the daughter, the oldest and the youngest, we're going to go. So nice. I keep an eye on tickets, so we're going to see.
Send me a pic. I want to see you there. Yeah.
Yeah, if we're there, I'll definitely send pics. All right. Let's jump into articles for this week. The first one is this one about the boards are stepping up. And we talk about this topic a lot on the show. And when I read this, when I saw the title, I'm like, come on.
Can I talk about the reverse of this, Matt? Not really this. Yeah.
Right. But what they did is this is limited to only the Fortune 100 companies. There's a whole heck of a lot. There's like 3,600 public companies. So all this data is focused on the Fortune 100. I don't know if this is, when I look at doing research and surveys and that kind of stuff, you typically want a little bigger sample size than 100.
Well, look, it's also like saying, what's the state of crime in a major city, and you only focus on the uber rich, right? They're not being affected. It's not that hard to see. So Sure, the Fortune 100, yeah, everybody has a CISO now, and they're putting in relatively a lot of money into security based on everybody else what they're putting in, but it's still, like you said, an uber small sample size and probably the wrong sample size to consider if you're actually looking at like what's the impact and how our board's addressing stuff. Like it's a no brainer, yeah, right.
Right. Agreed. Um, there are some interesting stats in here. Like, okay, everybody's using NIST. I would too. The National Institute of Standard Technology has been doing this for 20 plus years. Of
Yeah.
course, they're a great source for your framework, right? So that was interesting.
Well, and that's going to depend upon where you're like, are you US or are you EU, right? Or
right.
APAC, right? Like that's a lot of the framework discussion is. So yeah, if you're, and I would imagine most of the Fortune 100, I haven't done the analysis, but yeah, it's going to be primarily NIST. Yeah.
Primarily NIST. Yeah. And most of these reporting to the audit committee. Okay, we get it. But again, I think the sample size is way too small here because when you move outside of the Fortune 100, the
drop.
stats are going to be very different.
Yeah.
Like drastically different. Even if you go to the other Fortune 500, if you go to the 400 below,
I bet you it's like a night and day. That would have been more interesting article is to see what the comparison looks like between the two and make some, informed decisions about what that means for the rest of the environment. But yeah, just to look at just the top 100, not very helpful, I don't think. Yeah.
No, not very helpful. It's definitely not the appropriate sample set for the majority of companies out there.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. All right. So why should CISOs build strong relationships with the legal function next year? Now, I pulled this article in. I think there's some good data in here. I think there's one that they missed. As I was preparing for our pre-record tomorrow, just a little inside scoop. Forrester's coming on to talk about the future of the CISO. And one of the things we're going to talk about in that pre-record is legal from a personal perspective for CISOs. Now, this article doesn't really get into some of that. They talk more about from a regulatory, from a company perspective. But the Forrester report we cover tomorrow, Ben, is going to get really interesting in some of the issues, why you need to have like your own legal counsel and some other things. I thought this article would try to touch on it, but it's
interesting because the title of the article is why CISO should build stronger bonds with the legal function, right? And I think what a lot of people don't realize is I see this with HR too. A lot of people make the assumption that if you have an issue and you go talk to legal or you go talk to HR, they're there to help you as well. They're not. They're there to help the company, right? So I think that's an important distinction is like if you're thinking about what your legal framework looks like and what you should do to protect yourself, you certainly don't want to be talking to the internal legal function. You're going to have to talk to external counsel, right? That's engaged just with you. And that's just the relationship with legal, right? So I think that that does make a ton of sense why they didn't include it. But as a practicing CISO, I always said that the legal function and security function, it's like a three-legged race. Like you're tied at the hip to them and you have to be because almost everything you do has some impact or basis on the legal side, right? Like you're going to make a decision on how you should do something. You're going to want to get legal opinion on that, right? You're going to get a breach. One of the first people you're going to involve is legal, right? Like anything that happens in the cyber realm, you need to totally be tuned in. And so I say, it goes with all the C players, but certainly the CFO and your legal, you want to be tied into both of those really, really tightly. And make legal your friend because it smooths the wheels on a lot of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. In this article focuses on like the regulatory side of this, which is part of that legged stool, right? Because if you're a CISO, you're dealing with regulations and the compliance team and all this other stuff. Breach is obviously a big component of this, even to the point where, and I think, again, this might come up tomorrow on tomorrow's interview segment for the 20th, is the first call you make is to the lawyers.
Yeah.
Before you call anybody else.
That's right.
Because of the breach notification stuff, everything's going to get scrutinized by the lawyers going forward.
You want to get as much covered under privilege as possible, right? Like
exactly right.
That's always what we did is when we would look at something, we would call legal and say, okay, how do we start setting up the privilege shield around this, right? Now, I think a lot of people make the assumption that as soon as you call legal or you write an email, like everything's privileged, like facts aren't privileged, right? Like that's just the way it is. So you have to be, again, foment that discussion with legal ahead of time, have these like philosophical debates back and forth, understand what the landscape looks like. But the more you prep with that, the more you're tied into legal, I think the better you're prepared when something happens. You already have that framework for how to operate, and then you're just, handling the mechanics of the specifics of that operation. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is the privilege component that is the critical one, is that a lot of people assume as soon as the lawyers are in place, it's all privilege, but it's not. There's definitely some mechanisms that have to be put in place. And if you want to privilege any of that information to protect you and the organization, you definitely need the lawyers involved ASAP.
And you need to get your team up to speed on that too, right? Because I think a lot of people, especially at lower levels, assume if they send something to an attorney, it's covered, right? But if you're not marking it as privileged, if you're saying something that can't be privileged in that communication, like all that then becomes discoverable. So it's, again, really important to have that full life cycle discussion with your team, with legal, understand what the framework is and have that. But yeah, I think this is spot on. Not just 2025, but whenever, like I've been doing this for years, you should really have a tight relationship with legal and look at it as a partnership, right? I think a lot of stuff on the privacy side, it's who handles it. Does legal handle it? Does security handle it? It's kind of a split the baby kind of thing. So I think, again, it's one of those things, having a really good relationship will pay dividends in the long run for you.
Yes. So the article is right. I would expand the topics under the article a little more. That's all.
Yeah, that could be a really long article.
It could, but I think it's important to share this information with existing and or aspiring CISOs, right? Mm. Because you have to know this, and not every, and we're going to, again, some of this is going to get covered in the segment we're going to do tomorrow with Forrester, based on the type of role the CISO role you are, where you report in the organization also has some impact to this conversation as well.
Yeah, would agree. Would agree 100% on that.
Yeah. All right. So from help desk to CISO, lessons from my path to the top job in cybersecurity. So I've been holding this article. It's one I saw towards the end of last year, and I was kind of holding it to bring this one forward. This is a really interesting article of Marcos's kind of path to cybersecurity, and I think this is great for not only not CISOs themselves or aspiring CISOs, but even earlier in your career. He starts at the help desk from an IT perspective. He talks about moving from the help desk into management, into leadership, and the differences between those, and then eventually getting into the CISO job. And I think it's great lessons for anybody who aspires to grow their career in the cyberspace. Like, how do I get started? Where do I focus? He gives really good tips throughout this entire article on like things to just know and things that he doesn't know. Like it was interesting. It was a good read.
Well, I've often thought, like, and I'll talk about the sales process a little bit, right? I've been involved with startup companies, and one of the interesting things for me is a lot of people get burdened, upset, distraught over the fact of having to answer all these questions in the sales process, right? Like, who's this contact? What's that contact? What's the size of the opportunity? Like filling that seems like just minutia and busy work, but in essence, it's formulating all the stuff that you don't know, right? Because what you want is to understand where are the holes, what don't I know that I have to then go fill out and answer. And I think I equate that to this. When you're looking at your career, what are the things that are gaps that you don't know that if you fill out will create a more rounded CV that you can then present to an employer that says, hey, look, this guy doesn't know just one piece of the stack. He knows it all. And I would say this in a way mirrors some of my growth towards getting to my role as a CISO. Is I started out early. I started out kind of not necessarily on the help desk, but doing IT support. I started out doing AV response work, right? Way back in the day, running around SneakerNet with a floppy with a bunch of, ended up having 10, 15 people under me running around trying to fix, virus infections. So, it's that early start that I think builds the foundation for your later career. And I think a lot of people, we've talked about this before on this show, and I've talked about it with others, this conception of like, hey, I need an entry level job in cyber. And I am of the opinion, I know some people differ on this, but I'm of the opinion that there isn't really an entry level job in cyber. There's entry level jobs in IT related fields. Help desk is good. Network, technician, IT support desk, like any of those things where you're getting experience in something that then can relate to cyber. And then you
Right.
can make that jump because, yeah, you want to be a SOC analyst. Well, you got to kind of know how things work to be an effective SOC analyst, right? You can't just jump into a SOC analyst. And so that for me is what I liked about this article. It was really like laying a foundation for a career arc. And I think a lot of times people think that they know where they're going. I found out it's more likely you know where you've been, right? And an
Right.
opportunity presents itself to give you a journey into something else. And the more you can build out that roundedness, gives you the opportunity to take advantage when those opportunities present themselves.
Yeah, and I had a very similar start too, Ben. Like I started as a consultant doing antivirus deployments. Like that's how I started in cyber. Like that was the time. It's 1996 and we've got viruses and worms
Yeah,
everywhere, right?
yeah.
That's where we all started. And then I went in more onto the networking side as we were deploying, you know, demilitarized zones and redoing network security and all those early things, but it was very heavy IT related to cyber, around cyber projects. And then, and everybody has a point in their career they have to make key decisions. And
Mm.
he doesn't talk about it as much, but there's a decision point somewhere in your career that you're going to take a CISO path or you're not going to take a CISO path. Like that's a very kind of, because to become a CISO means you go in house, you stay in house, you learn, you kind of build out those skill sets. See, I want the vendor path because I
Mm.
decided for some crazy reason 20 years ago to start building software. That put me on a very different path than others in the space. Now, you've actually kind of bridged that pretty well, I think, in your career because you've been on the vendor side, but you've also been on the customer side. Once I kind of doubled down on the vendor side, I never saw me going back in house to another CISO into a CISO role.
Yeah, I think a lot that is for a lot of people an either or track, right? I don't think there are a lot of people who've gone back and forth. I actually have done it several times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Weirdly enough, like even when I work for a security vendor, right, as a CISO, um, I like to tell people that like everybody's a vendor, right? You're selling something to somebody, right? So if you're General Motors, you're selling cars, right? If you're Bank of America, you're selling, some type of financial services products. But at the end of the day, when you get into a vendor, it is a little bit different. Sometimes you're kind of speaking on behalf of the company about security and why the product's good. So there is a little bit of differentiation there. But I think being open to opportunities again as they present themselves and looking at those things and saying, hey, this is a career shifting moment. I can go left or I can go right. If I go right and I want to get back left, like how do I architect that so I'm setting myself up where I've got some fallback, right? Because and there's nothing wrong if you want to go down the vendor path and always be in startups and that's your thing and you like it, that's awesome. But if you're not sure, then make sure you have a way back, right? And that was a big thing for me. I think, again, opportunities come up. I look for those opportunities, and when they're the right opportunities, I try to take advantage of them. And it's been great for my career. And I think, you on the vendor side, you've had a great career as well, right? And I think that's the most anyone can hope for is to have a really good career, be respected in our field, and then hopefully like this, be able to give back and have discussions about it and help other people kind of think about that journey. And
Yeah, and figure out which way they want to go. Yeah.
yeah, he had lesson 3 in here, which I like, right? Self awareness is the secret to becoming a successful leader. And the older I get, the more important it is to think about self awareness. And I think early in your career, you don't think about that. It's like blaze new trails, do what I want, like, make money. But like self awareness, like helps out not just in like making money, but it helps you figure out like, man, these are the holes that I have, as we talked about before, that I have to create better coverage, right? I have to address things that are gaps or deficiencies. Or, man, I just was talking. I do another podcast for Halcyon, and we were talking the other day about like a lot of the. I'm serious. Like I come off with a very serious, attitude. I have to be a little more, happy and funny and humorous, right? Because it just endears people. So it's how you think about everything around your career, right? From your presentation, your persona to your technical skills. What do you pull together? That's that self-awareness to think about what do I need to do to get me to that next stage.
Right. What makes you happy too at the end of the
Yeah,
day,
yeah.
right?
And the CISO job isn't for everybody, right? Like
It's not.
uh,
Yeah.
you and I had that discussion. You at one point were thinking, hey, do I try to go down that route? And I was like, hey, look, this is, yeah, it's not for everybody. Sometimes it's not a fun job. Like it just isn't, right? But what do you like? What makes you at the end of the day happy in your career and in your personal life?
Yep. Yeah. And this art, anybody who aspires to be a CISO, read this article. It, I think it is a good set of lessons here that you just, if you want to do it, like these are the things you should be thinking about and working through.
And talk to some CISOs and find out what the job's really about. Don't make assumptions about what it's about. Find out what it's about, right? Do your research.
Yep. Absolutely. Next article is cybersecurity's role in safeguarding leadership. Now, this is a CyberWire podcast. Their podcasts are audio. We know the folks over at CyberWire very well. This is in response to Brian Thompson's murder,
Yeah,
actually,
UAC.
and it talks about how executive protection needs to change. I listened to almost all of it. There was a little bit at the end I didn't finish, but it was really eye-opening to me. And I'm going to bring this to this venue so people hopefully kind of understand it. The way executive protection was kind of done before this incident was, yes, physical security, maybe armed security, depending on where you are. And I remember the days when I was at was at RSA, traveling with Art Coviello and having security detail around Art, like physical security guards, right? That evolved a little more over the years into social and dark web monitoring, as well as some geospatial understanding where you're traveling and what's going on in the areas. That's kind of been like the traditional executive protection capabilities. But one of the things that he highlights, it's about a third into this, is that executive protection has been more of a vanity component. Yeah. He believes because of the way you can get tax breaks for corporate travel, corporate jets, etc. He said there's a tax loophole that says if you have a corporate jet and you're using it for business, then it's an expense to the business. But if you use it for personal, it now becomes part of personal compensation as a benefit. Yeah. Unless you can have executive protection because you're worried about your safety, your family safety when you're on those trips. And he said a lot of people have these executive protection programs in place that allow them to use a corporate jet for both business and pleasure, because with that service, you can write off the expense of the corporate. It was just and it floored the guys when he said it on the podcast. Nobody thinks about it from that perspective, Ben. And so it may have been a vanity thing, but I think it's going to shift because, when you're traveling overseas, it's one thing. But when you're in New York City walking across the street, that's a very different set of circumstances. And they're talking through how will this shift executive protection for the future to be a little more secure, even in your own backyard.
Yeah, look, I think that it's going to become a lot more a topic of conversation as the boardroom. I think as people come into roles, it's going to take more of the time, right? Hey, when I'm getting hired, this is something I need to have included. I also think you might see this stretch outside of just the CEO, right? You might see it trickle down to other C-level executives. And so I think depending upon the industry, depending upon the role, depending upon the, what type of company it is, we're going to see a lot more of this. And I thought you were going to go a completely different way. I thought you were going to talk maybe more about, how I think cyber is going to have more of a piece in this. I think you're right. It was a lot of physical protection, but I think, even when we years ago, when we started look at this and say what's your social media presence look like, right? What can someone determine about this? And I think people were posting, hey, I'm headed to, Utah for the week. Right. Well, everybody can figure out that you're headed for Utah for the week. Right. And so what does that say about your public persona that people can then determine and take action based upon that. I think cyber is going to have a bigger role in trying to look at not just the corporate side of it, but the personal corporate side
Personal
of it,
side.
right?
Has to.
Which there
Yeah.
are some companies that are doing this. I know, Chris Peterson has a company doing this that kind of bridges the gap a little bit. Corporations looking at the corporate personal side, because it's not just the corporate executive; it's also the family members, right? Like you can
Right.
imagine, let's say he was in New York City. Nobody approached him with a gun, but somebody took one of his kids hostage. Like that's going to create the same potential type of effect and panic, right? So, and when that stuff happens, it creates impact for the business because even if it's not, a death like that, let's say it's just we had an issue with somebody who got kind of man in the middle when they were buying a house on an executive side, and they transferred the money to a bad actor. That takes that executive out of the game for weeks, right, if not months, right? So his head's not in it. The business suffers as a result. So I do think that's the case. And as you interestingly brought up, I think the interesting pieces that nobody thinks about on the protection side and how that affects both income and benefits will be, a topic of discussion.
Yeah. I mean, they talk through why they have private drivers so they're not liable in case there's a car wreck. Same with corporate air travel, right? It is a risk reduction thing. It's also a liability protection. And so I hear you. I think it can extend, it probably has to extend beyond just corporate into the personal life. Caleb Barlow, who was doing the interview, talked about when he became a public CEO, he lost a ton of privacy. They know how much he makes. They know where he lives. Like you lose a sense of privacy when you're running a public company too. So that's another component is people have access to all this information now that's not necessarily related to the company. It's your personal home address. It's your kids. It's potentially anything.
Yeah, look, I mean, as you go higher up the ladder, you have to think about these trade-offs, right? Like it's, you can't say, "Hey, it's 5 o'clock, I'm going home." You're a CEO, you're a CFO, you're a CISO, like you're kind of always on, right? But those same kind of things of like the exposure of all that information that becomes public, that's not necessarily always a positive thing for some people. So you have to think about it. And I think this whole topic about, what does cyber cover around this, right? Does the person who's the CSO for the company, who's mainly done cyber and IT security, is he now taking over physical security as well? As we talked about in the last article, that's a gap, right? That's a hole. You should probably try to figure out like how, if you're a CISO now, or you think about becoming a CISO, how are you going to cover that area, right? How are you going to address that detail that you didn't have to do yesterday, but maybe now your CEO is going to come and ask, can you do that? And if you keep the seat at the table, if your influence grows wider, if you can say yes, it probably is a positive thing. If you say, no, I can't do that, we need to hire somebody else, that's probably not necessarily a positive thing.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's where some outsourcing firms will get some work, I'm sure.
A lot. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot.
But it's still going to roll up to somebody, right? Even if it's outsourced, somebody has to take it on. So can you do it? Can you run that outsourcer, right? Can you speak intelligently enough at the board level to cover that topic? You don't have to be an expert, but you've got to know the piece that you need to know.
Yeah. Or does legal do it? Legal run
Could be. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. That's another place for it to potentially go. Yeah. Next article, 2025's burning question. Can your compliance program pass DOJ scrutiny? Now, it depends because the DOJ is going to change in about 7 days.
Yeah.
So I think the premise of this article is new regulatory expectations, emerging technologies could create some changes to the way you have to approach your compliance programs in 2025. Then again, some stuff might get rolled back and may not need to get addressed.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think also the Chevron decision, right? Like that is people aren't thinking enough about that, but we're already starting to see that. Net neutrality, right, had a big impact with the Chevron decision recently. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. And yeah, I think it remains to be seen. I think people have a lot of expectations with the new administration, but let's see how it shakes out. But certainly it will not be the same as the previous administration, right? Like,
correct.
So I think this remains to be seen as where that's going to happen as far as, DOJ.
Yeah, because I think what the Chevron decision, I think, is an important one here for the SEC cyber rules, for anything the FTC is trying to do, et cetera. These departments can't unilaterally put some of the stuff in place without legal binding law behind it. And
Yep.
that is where you're going to see a lot of the stuff potentially challenged if agencies are trying to enforce certain things and it's not coming from Congress directly. And that's why I pulled this article in so we could talk about this topic because, yeah, I see all this, but I don't know how much of this is still going to be valid in 7 days.
100%. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of change on the legal landscape. I think people have to prep themselves for it and the potential opportunities and pitfalls that that's going to provide.
Yeah. Where I would be concerned if I'm a US company are the things that are happening in Europe.
Europe.
DORA, the EU AI privacy, because those, if you're international, those are definitely going to impact you because Europe's done, in my opinion, a better job in putting teeth into regulatory requirements like that from these bodies. And so if you're a company doing business in Europe, those are the ones you definitely need to prepare for.
Yeah, agreed with that. Yeah, I think they definitely the fines and the potential impact that you have of actually something coming down versus it getting waived in court, a lot more likely in the EU.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's go to our last article because I don't think we'll need the other two based on timing. So, new managers, you don't need to know it all, which is so true. But you don't always need to know everything. This article does a really, really good job of when you don't know the answer, different phrases and different ways to go get the answers, right? So, in my early days as a manager, and we didn't talk about this 2 articles ago, when he talked about the differences between a manager and leadership.
Yeah.
It's going to come in here a little more, I think, in this article too. Managers, right? You're managing people, right? And so you've got people coming to you looking for answers. You may not have all the answers because your leadership is kind of giving you things to do or telling you to do things, but you may not know all the reasons why. This happens all the time, by the way, as in all of last week in my day job. Like there is a difference between what leadership wants to do and how that gets managed down to the lower staff. Okay. And so you may not, as a manager, know all the answers. Now I have the luxury of sitting on the leadership team, so I do, but my staff doesn't necessarily always know why a certain thing is. So what I thought was really interesting in here is some of the responses on how you can address when you don't know it. And so, obviously I'm not sure, but I'll go find out, right? Yeah, I will. Like if I don't know it, I'll go ask, or let's go figure it out together. Yeah, that's always a good one. That's a great one to build teamwork and pull a team together. So it was good for people. If you are in this position, these are some of the approaches you can take in order to figure it out.
Yeah, it's interesting that earlier in people's career, I think that there's a tendency to want to always give a yes or have the answer ready. And I tried to coach and encourage people like, look, if you don't know it, just let me know, right? Let me know that you don't know it. Let's not try to fake it till you make it, right? But be willing to go out and do the work, right? Say, hey, let me go get that, and I'll come back at this time and give you this answer. But I think as you get higher, there is this propensity you need to build confidence and instill confidence in the team to let them know that, yeah, you might not have the info, but that's okay, right? Like it's okay that you don't know. Like here's the scope of what we have to fill out, because there are things as manager, director, C-level exec, you're not going to be able to share at a lower level because it's just not for public consumption, right? For everybody, because these decisions have to stay closed for a while until something happens, and then it becomes, open knowledge. So yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the other things he talked about in his journey is about transparency, right? This is another place where transparency will help you. I don't know, but I know who knows. I'll go figure it out, or we can go figure it out together. Being transparent is part of that transition between a manager and a leader. And it's something that if you aspire to be in a leadership position, it's something you will have to learn how to address and
Yeah.
deal with, is because that transparency, I believe, is very important for leadership. You as a manager may not be able to do all that, but you should be as transparent as you can with your team to start to build that confidence, to start to build that right
Hey,
culture.
your team needs transparency, right? Like it's
Yes.
super important. I think a lot of people, hey, they want to protect their team, right? Not tell them bad news. But I think, hey, look, sometimes you have to, there's a fine line between transparency and protecting your team. And you've got to figure out where that balance is to be able to say, hey, look, here's some bad news, got to pass it on, but here's how we're going to react to that. Here's how we're going to move forward. Here's how we have a plan. Like creating that sense that, yes, bad things happen, but you know how to get through them and you can help your team get through them. That's that transparency that's super important to make sure people know that you're not they don't feel like you're hiding stuff from them, right? They don't feel like there's always this undercurrent of something else going on. They feel like you have that relationship where you're going to share the right level of information. So yeah, I think the transparency is super key.
Yeah, because it builds trust.
It
builds
does.
trust across the team, and you need trust. If you're going to work with these people, you got to build trust because you want to make sure that you can all execute in a trustful environment. So very important. Ben, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me today.
Same here, Matt. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We're doing a pre-record tomorrow with Forrester for next week. You do not want to miss it. It's about the future of the CISO. It's an awesome report. We're going to do 2 segments with the Forrester analysts. So we will see you again live in 2 weeks on Business Security Weekly.